3 years I spent being Emma's study buddy, her emotional support, her midnight crisis counselor. 3 years I watched her parade boyfriend after boyfriend while telling me I was too important to risk losing as a friend. When she finally got serious with Tyler, the golden boy from Kappa Sigma, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd realize what was right in front of her. Instead, she made it crystal clear I was nothing more than her safety net. What happened next taught us both a lesson about real value that neither of us will ever forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in the engineering building's study room buzzed overhead as I stared at my thermodynamics textbook, the equations blurring together like they had every night for the past 2 weeks. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, and while most Pacific State University students were either partying or sleeping, I was exactly where I'd been every Thursday night for 3 years, waiting for Emma Collins to text me about some crisis that apparently only I could solve. My phone vibrated against the scratched wooden table. Emma's name lit up the screen with a message that made my stomach drop. "Jake, I need you. Can you meet me at Brew and Bean in 20? It's about Tyler." Tyler Richardson. Just seeing his name made something twist in my chest. 6 months they'd been together now, and in that time, I'd become intimately familiar with every fight, every makeup, every moment of doubt Emma experienced in their relationship. I was her confidant, her advisor, her shoulder to cry on. What I wasn't, despite 3 years of hoping, was someone she'd ever considered dating. I packed my books with practiced efficiency, the same routine I'd followed countless times before. Walk across campus to the coffee shop that stayed open until midnight. Listen to Emma pour her heart out about whatever Tyler had done wrong this time, offer advice that I knew would help her fix things with him, watch her smile gratefully and call me her best friend in the world before she went back to the guy who treated her like an accessory. The October air was crisp as I walked through the campus quad, my breath visible in small puffs. Pacific State's campus was beautiful at night, with old-fashioned lampposts casting golden circles of light on the pathways and the distant sound of waves from the nearby coastline. Under different circumstances, it would have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a walk to my own execution. Brew and Bean was nearly empty when I arrived. Just a few graduate students hunched over laptops and the tired-looking barista counting down the minutes until closing. Emma was already there, sitting in our usual corner booth with 2 cups of coffee, mean prepared exactly the way I liked it, with cream and 1 sugar. She always remembered details like that, which made everything so much more confusing. Looked up as I approached, and I felt that familiar flutter in my chest that I'd been trying to suppress for years. Emma had this way of looking effortlessly beautiful, even when she was upset. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing Tyler's oversized Kappa Sigma sweatshirt over leggings. Even in distress, she looked like she belonged on the cover of a college brochure. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I wasn't sure you would." I slid into the booth across from her, fighting the urge to ask why she'd think I wouldn't come. In 3 years, I'd never once ignored her calls or messages, no matter what I was doing. "What's going on, Em?" She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and stared into it like it might contain answers. "Hey, Tyler and I had this huge fight tonight. He wants me to go to his family's winter formal in Aspen over Christmas break. But I already promised my parents I'd be home for my cousin's wedding. When I told him I couldn't change my plans, he said some really hurtful things." I waited for her to continue, already knowing how this conversation would go. She'd tell me about Tyler's selfishness. I'd validate her feelings and offer perspective. She'd realize she was overreacting, or that Tyler had his own point of view. By tomorrow, they'd be back to posting couple photos on Instagram. "He said I don't prioritize our relationship," Emma continued, her voice getting smaller. "That I always put other people first. Then he said maybe we should take a break if I can't make time for what's important to him." The logical part of my brain recognized that Tyler was being manipulative, using the threat of a breakup to control Emma's decisions. It's a part of me that had been hopelessly in love with her for 3 years felt a flicker of hope that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time she'd finally see Tyler for who he really was. That's emotional manipulation, Mim, I said carefully. He's putting you in an impossible position. You made a commitment to your family first. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I know you're right. It's just, things have been so good between us lately. We've been talking about moving in together after graduation, maybe even getting engaged in a year or two. I don't want to throw that away over one fight. There it was. The punch to the gut that always came. No matter what Tyler did, no matter how poorly he treated her, Emma always found a way to justify staying with him. Because he represented something I never could, the future she wanted. The popular guy with the trust fund and the family connections, who could give her the life she'd dreamed about since high school. You shouldn't have to choose between your family and your boyfriend, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. The right person would understand that your cousin's wedding is important to you. Emma reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. The contact sent electricity through my arm, even after all this time. This is why you're so important to me, Jake. You always know exactly what to say. You get me in a way that Tyler sometimes doesn't. I stared down at her hand covering mine, fighting the urge to turn my palm up and interlace our fingers. Then why are you with him? The question hung in the air between us, and for a moment I thought she might actually answer it honestly. Instead, she pulled her hand back and gave me a sad smile. Because it's complicated, she said. Tyler and I, it makes sense together. We're both business majors. We run in the same circles. Our families have similar backgrounds. And when things are good between us, they're really good. He can be incredibly sweet and romantic when he wants to be. But, I prompted. But he's not you, she said quietly. He doesn't listen to me the way you do. Doesn't remember little things about me or check in when I'm stressed about exams. Doesn't make me laugh until my sides hurt or stay up. Until 3 a.m, talking about everything and nothing. My heart started racing. This was new territory for us. Emma had never been this direct about comparing Tyler to me. Never acknowledged out loud that there was something between us that she didn't have with her boyfriend. Ah! Emma started, but she cut me off. I know what you're thinking, she said, shaking her head, and you're wrong. You and I. We're perfect as friends. What we have is too special to risk ruining with romance. I've seen what happens when friends try to date. It never works out, and then you lose the friendship too. The words hit me like a physical blow. After 3 years of hoping, of believing that maybe she felt something for me too, she'd just made it crystal clear that I was firmly planted in the friend zone with no possibility of escape. Besides, she continued, apparently oblivious too, the fact that she'd just shattered my heart. You're not really the relationship type, are you? And I've never seen you with anyone serious. You're more of the casual dating, playing the field kind of guy. I almost laughed at the irony. The reason I'd never had a serious relationship was sitting right across from me. How could I commit to someone else when I'd been holding out hope for her? How could I give my heart to another person when Emma already owned it completely? Yeah, I managed to say. I guess I am. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both lost in our own thoughts. The barista was starting to clean the espresso machine, a not-so-subtle hint that closing time was approaching. So, what are you going to do about Tyler? I asked, hating myself for prolonging this conversation, but unable to stop myself from caring about her problems. I'm going to call him tomorrow and apologize, Emma said, straightening up with renewed resolve. You're right that he was being unfair, but I could have handled it better too. I'll explain about my cousin's wedding and suggest we plan our own special trip for New Year's instead. Maybe we can go skiing in Lake Tahoe or something. I nodded, feeling the familiar weight of disappointment settle in my chest.
That sounds
like a good compromise. Thank you, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand again. I don't know what I'd do without you, Jake. You're honestly the best friend a girl could ask for. Best friend. There it was again, the title that felt more like a prison sentence every time she said it. We walked back across campus together, making small talk about upcoming exams and holiday plans. When we reached the fork in the path where we'd have to split up her toward the sorority row and me toward the engineering dormitories, she stopped and turned to face me. I'm really lucky to have you in my life, she said, standing on her tiptoes to give me a hug. Oh, Thank you for always being there for me. I wrapped my arms around her, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and trying to memorize the feeling of holding her. When she pulled away, she smiled up at me with that radiant expression that had first captured my attention 3 years ago. Good night, Jake. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Good night, Em. I watched her walk away until she disappeared around the corner, then stood there for several more minutes staring at the empty pathway. The campus was quiet now except for the distant sound of music from the fraternity houses and the ever-present whisper of ocean waves. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate Marcus. How'd it go with Emma? Please tell me you finally grew a pair and told her how you feel. I typed back, same as always. I'm her best friend, and Tyler's the love of her life. Dude, you need to move on. This is getting painful to watch. Marcus was right, and I knew it. But knowing something intellectually and actually doing, it were two very different things. How do you stop loving someone who's been the center of your world for 3 years? How do you walk away from the person who makes you laugh harder and think deeper than anyone else you've ever met? My dorm room, I tried to focus on my thermodynamics homework, but my mind kept wandering back to Emma's words. You're not really the relationship type, are you? The assumption that I was some kind of player who preferred casual hookups to serious commitment? The casual dismissal of any romantic possibility between us because I was too important to risk losing as a friend. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being Emma Collins' emotional support system while she gave her heart to someone who didn't deserve it. I was done being the safety net she could fall back on whenever Tyler disappointed her. I was done settling for crumbs of affection. When I deserved someone who would choose me first, not just when their first choice wasn't available. The next morning, for the first time in 3 years, I didn't text Emma to ask how her conversation with Tyler had gone. When she messaged me about meeting up for our usual Friday study session, I told her I had other plans. When she called that weekend crying about another fight with Tyler, I let it go to voicemail. It was time to stop being her backup plan and start being my own first choice. The change didn't happen overnight. 3 years of established patterns aren't easy to break, especially when the other person doesn't understand why you're suddenly unavailable. Emma was persistent in her attempts to maintain our usual dynamic. She'd show up at the library where I studied, claiming she just happened to be there. She'd text me funny memes and inside jokes, trying to draw me back into our old rhythm of constant communication. But I held firm. Every time I felt my resolve weakening, I reminded myself of how it felt to sit in that coffee shop, listening to her plan a romantic getaway with a guy who'd threatened to break up with her just hours earlier. I thought about her assumption that I wasn't capable of a serious relationship. The casual way she dismissed any possibility of us being together. The hardest part was watching her confusion turn to hurt, then to anger. Emma wasn't used to people saying no to her, especially not me. She was accustomed to being the center of attention, the girl everyone wanted to be around. My sudden absence from her life left a gap she didn't know how to fill. It was Marcus who finally helped me see that my withdrawal was just the first step in a much larger transformation I needed to make. We were grabbing dinner at the student union when he pointed out something I hadn't fully realized myself. You know what's interesting? Said, stabbing his fork into his salad. You've spent 3 years organizing your entire life around Emma's schedule. Your study habits, your social plans, even your class schedule. It all revolved around being available whenever she needed you. Now that you've stopped doing that, what are you actually going to do with all that time and energy? It was a fair question, and one I didn't have a good answer for. I'd been so focused on extracting myself from Emma's orbit that I hadn't given much thought to what would replace it. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I never really thought about it. Maybe it's time to start, Marcus said. When's the last time you did something just for you? Something that had nothing to do with Emma or what she might think about it. I sat there thinking, and the answer was depressing. I couldn't remember the last time I'd made a decision based purely on my own interests and desires. Every choice I'd made for the past 3 years had been filtered through the lens of how it might affect my relationship with Emma or my availability to her. That conversation with Marcus became the catalyst for what I would later recognize as the most important period of growth in my life. I started small, signing up for a rock climbing class I'd always been curious about but never had time for. I joined the robotics club, diving deep into projects that challenged me intellectually and introduced me to a whole new group of people. For the first time in years, I began to remember who Jake Martinez was when he wasn't defined by his relationship to Emma Collins. I remembered that I was funny and creative, that I had opinions and interests that had nothing to do with her. I remembered that I was actually pretty good company when I wasn't constantly distracted by thoughts of someone who would never return my feelings. The changes weren't just internal. I started working out regularly, not because I thought it would make Emma notice me, but because I enjoyed the endorphin rush and the sense of accomplishment. I updated my wardrobe, replacing the safe. Unremarkable clothes I'd worn for years, with styles that actually reflected my personality. I began saying yes to social invitations I would have previously declined in case Emma needed me. The transformation was gradual but steady, and people began to notice. My confidence grew as I started succeeding in areas that had nothing to do with my romantic life. The robotics team I joined won a regional competition. My grades improved when I stopped staying up late, providing emotional support, and started focusing on my studies. I made new friends who knew me as Jake the engineer, Jake the rock climber, Jake the guy with the dry sense of humor, not Jake the guy who was pathetically in love with his best friend. Most importantly, I started dating. Not seriously at first, casual coffee dates and study sessions that sometimes turned into something more. But for the first time in 3 years, I was open to the possibility of caring about someone other than Emma. And what I discovered surprised me. There were actually quite a few women who found me attractive and interesting when I wasn't completely emotionally unavailable. It was during this period of growth and change that I met someone who would help me understand just how unhealthy my dynamic with Emma had really been. Her name was Sophia Williams, and she was everything I hadn't known I was looking for. Met in the most ordinary way possible, she was the barista at a new coffee shop downtown that I had discovered during one of my long walks around Ocean View. Unlike Brew and Bean, with all its memories of late-night crisis sessions with Emma, this place felt fresh and uncomplicated. Sophia had short auburn hair that caught the light when she moved, and green eyes that seemed to see right through the polite small talk most people hid behind. She was a psychology major, which maybe explained why she had this way of asking questions that made you think deeper about your own motivations. When I ordered my usual coffee with cream and 1 sugar, she tilted her head and asked, "Is that actually how you like it, or is that just how you've always ordered it?" The question caught me off guard. I stood there for a moment, genuinely unsure of the answer. "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "Try it black first," she suggested, sliding a small cup across the counter. "Then we'll add things until it tastes right to you." It was such a simple interaction, but something about it felt revolutionary. Here was someone who cared about what I actually wanted, not what I thought I was supposed to want. It turned out was better with just a splash of cream and no sugar. I'd been drinking it wrong for years without even realizing it. Sophia and I started talking regularly during my visits to the coffee shop. She was doing her senior thesis on codependent relationships, which led to conversations that hit uncomfortably close to home. She never pushed or pried, but her casual observations about healthy versus unhealthy relationship dynamics began to reframe how I viewed my entire history with Emma. Codependency often masquerades as loyalty or deep friendship, she mentioned. One afternoon, as I sat at the counter during a lull in customers, but really it's about one person consistently sacrificing their own needs to manage another person's emotions. The giver feels needed and important, while the taker gets to avoid taking responsibility for their own feelings and decisions. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. What if the giver genuinely wants to help? "Wanting to help someone you care about is natural and healthy," Sophia said, wiping down the espresso machine. "But when your entire sense of self-worth becomes dependent on being needed by that person, When you start neglecting your own life to be constantly available for their crises, that's when it becomes problematic. She paused, glancing up at me with those perceptive green eyes. The really insidious part is that both people usually think they're in a beautiful, deep friendship. They don't recognize the imbalance because the codependent dynamic meets certain emotional needs for both of them. Her words stayed with me for days. I found myself analyzing my relationship with Emma through this new lens, and what I saw wasn't pretty. How many times had I canceled plans or stayed up all night because Emma was having a crisis? How many opportunities had I passed up because I needed to be available in case she needed me? How many times had I prioritized her emotional needs over my own basic well-being? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Sophia was right. Emma and I hadn't been in a friendship, we'd been in a codependent relationship where I consistently gave and she consistently took. She got to feel loved and supported without having to reciprocate in any meaningful way, while I got to feel necessary and important, even though I was slowly losing myself in the process. This realization coincided with some major changes happening in Emma's life that I only heard about through mutual friends. Tyler had apparently taken their winter break fight as an opportunity to hook up with his ex-girlfriend during a ski trip with his fraternity brothers. When Emma found out through social media photos, she finally had her own wake-up call about what kind of person she'd been dating. According to my friend David from the robotics club, who was dating one of Emma's sorority sisters, the breakup had been spectacular. Emma had shown up at a Kappa Sigma party specifically to confront Tyler in front of all his friends. The confrontation had ended with her throwing a drink in his face and storming out, but not before telling him exactly what she thought of his character and his family's money. Under normal circumstances, this would have been the moment Emma called me. Her phone would have lit up with a tearful request to meet her somewhere so she could process what had happened. I would have dropped everything to be there for her, probably staying up until dawn listening to her work through her feelings and helping her plan her next move. Instead, I heard about it secondhand 3 days later. The realization that Emma hadn't even tried to reach out to me during what was probably the most emotionally difficult breakup of her college career felt like validation that I was making the right choice in stepping back. But validation didn't make it any less painful. Despite everything I'd learned about codependency and unhealthy relationship patterns, despite the personal growth I'd been experiencing, despite the new connections I was making with people like Sophia, part of me still felt guilty for not being there when Emma needed support. The conditioning of 3 years doesn't disappear overnight. Sophia seemed to sense my internal struggle without me having to explain it. During one of our conversations, she mentioned that recovery from codependent patterns often involves feeling guilty for setting boundaries, even when those boundaries are healthy and necessary. The person who's used to receiving all that emotional support might try to pull you back into the old dynamic. Refilling my coffee cup. They might not even do it consciously, but they'll test your boundaries to see if you'll revert to your old patterns. The key is recognizing those attempts for what they are and staying firm in your new boundaries. Her words proved prophetic. About a week after the Tyler breakup drama, Emma finally reached out. She didn't call or text. Instead, she showed up at my dorm room on a Tuesday evening, looking fragile and vulnerable in a way that was clearly calculated to trigger my protective instincts. "Jake," she said when I opened the door, her eyes already filling with tears. "I know you've been busy lately, but I really need to talk to someone who knows me. Everything with Tyler has been so awful, and I don't know how to process it all without you." The old me would have immediately invited her in, made her tea, and spent the next 4 hours helping her work through her feelings about the breakup. The new me recognized this moment as exactly what Sophia had warned me about, an attempt to pull me back into our old dynamic when Emma was feeling emotionally vulnerable. "I'm sorry you're going through a tough time," I said, staying in the doorway instead of inviting her in. "But I'm not really available to talk tonight. I have plans." The truth was that my only plan was to finish a programming assignment and maybe watch a movie with Marcus, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that I was prioritizing my own time and energy instead of automatically making myself available whenever Emma decided she needed me. Emma's expression shifted from vulnerable to confused to something approaching panic. "Plans? What kind of plans?" Can't you cancel them? I mean, this is important, Jake. Tyler cheated on me. I found out through Instagram photos. I confronted him at a party and made a complete fool of myself. I need my best friend right now. There it was, the guilt trip disguised as an appeal to our friendship. The assumption that her emotional crisis should automatically take priority over anything else I might have going on. The expectation that I would drop everything to manage. Her feelings about a relationship I had warned her about from the beginning. That sounds really difficult, I said, meaning it sincerely. But I'm not the right person to help you process this. Maybe you should call one of your sorority sisters. Or better yet, consider talking to someone at the campus counseling center. Emma stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. The counseling center. Jake, what's wrong with you? We've been friends for 3 years. I tell you everything. You're the person I trust most in the world.
Why are you acting like I'm
some stranger asking for a favor? Her confusion was genuine, which made the conversation even more difficult. Emma truly didn't understand why I was no longer available to be her emotional support system. In her mind, our friendship meant that I should always be there when she needed me, regardless of what was going on in my own life. I care about you. I said carefully. I can't be your primary source of emotional support anymore. It's not healthy for either of us. It's not healthy. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. How is friendship not healthy? How is caring about each other not healthy? I don't understand what's happening here, Jake. Ever since you started acting weird a few weeks ago, it's like you've become a completely different person. Marcus appeared behind me in the hallway, clearly having overheard at least part of the conversation. Hey, Emma, he said politely but without his usual warmth. Jake and I were just about to head out. Maybe you two can catch up some other time. Emma's eyes darted between Marcus and me, and I could see her trying to figure out what was really going on. Head out where? She asked. Since when do you two have plans on Tuesday nights? Since I stopped organizing my schedule around other people's crises, I said, the words coming out sharper than I'd intended. The comment hit its mark. Emma's face flushed, and for a moment I thought she might start crying right there in the hallway. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and gave me a look I'd never seen from her before, cold and calculating. I see, she said quietly. So this is about Tyler. You're punishing me because I chose him over you. This whole boundary setting thing is just your way of getting back at me for not returning your feelings. The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth to it, even though it missed the larger point entirely. Yes, my romantic feelings for Emma had been part of what made our dynamic so unhealthy. But my decision to step back wasn't about punishment. It was about finally choosing my own emotional well-being over the comfortable familiarity of being needed by someone who would never truly value what I had to offer. This isn't about punishment, I said. It's about recognizing that our friendship wasn't as balanced as I thought it was. I spent 3 years being available whenever you needed support, but when's the last time you asked how I was doing? When's the last time you made time for something that was important to me, instead of always talking about your problems? Emma opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. I could see her mentally scrolling through our interactions, trying to find examples that would contradict what I'd said. The fact that she couldn't find any was written clearly on her face. That's not fair, she said finally. You never asked for support. You always seemed like you had everything together. How was I supposed to know you needed anything from me? It was a fair point, but it also proved exactly what I'd been trying to tell her. In 3 years of friendship, she'd never once looked beneath the surface to see that I might have my own struggles, my own needs, my own life beyond being her emotional support system. She'd accepted my constant availability as natural and normal, never questioning whether it might be costing me something to always be there for her. You're right, I said. I never asked for support because I didn't think I was allowed to. Our entire friendship was built around me being the stable, reliable one who was always there to help you figure out your problems. There was never space for me to be anything else. The conversation continued for another few minutes, but it was clear that we were talking past each other. Emma couldn't understand why I was suddenly unavailable when she needed me most, and I couldn't make her see that her expectation of my constant availability was exactly the problem. When she finally left, walking away with wounded dignity and the promise that she wouldn't bother me anymore, since I clearly didn't value our friendship, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness, relief that I'd held my boundaries even when it was difficult. Sadness that a relationship that had meant so much to me for so long was ending with hurt feelings and misunderstanding. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder as we watched her disappear down the hallway. "That was brutal, but you did the right thing," he said. She needed to hear all of that, even if she doesn't understand it yet. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the new life I was building. The robotics club became a major focus, especially as we prepared for a national competition that could lead to internship opportunities with major tech companies. I spent more time with Sophia, our conversations evolving from casual coffee shop chats to actual dates that had nothing to do with analyzing my past relationship patterns. The change in my social life was dramatic. Instead of spending my evenings waiting for Emma's texts or calls, I was actually out doing things: rock climbing at the campus recreation center, attending engineering department mixers, exploring Ocean View's surprisingly vibrant downtown scene with new friends who knew nothing about my history with Emma Collins. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was living my own life instead of existing in the margins of someone else's. And the more I experienced what healthy relationships actually felt like: reciprocal conversations, mutual support, shared interests, respect for boundaries, the more I realized just how one-sided my friendship with Emma had really been. The transformation wasn't always easy. There were moments when I missed the familiar comfort of being needed. The way Emma used to light up when I solved her problems or provided the exact emotional support she was looking for. But those moments of nostalgia were increasingly outnumbered by moments of genuine happiness and satisfaction with the life I was building for myself. The real test came when I heard through the campus grapevine that Emma was struggling academically and socially in the aftermath of her breakup with Tyler, without me as her primary emotional support and study partner. She was apparently finding it difficult to manage the stress of senior year. Part of me felt guilty for not being there to help her through this challenging time. But a larger part of me recognized that learning to handle her own problems without relying on me was exactly what Emma needed to do. Just as I was learning to build a life that didn't revolve around being her support system, she needed to learn how to be self-sufficient and seek appropriate help when she needed it. It was Sophia who helped me see that my guilt about Emma's struggles was another manifestation of the codependent thinking I was trying to overcome. "You're not responsible for her emotional well-being," she reminded me during one of our study dates at the library. "You can care about someone without feeling obligated to rescue them from the consequences of their own choices." That perspective shift was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, I was able to focus entirely on my own goals and growth without the constant background worry about whether Emma was okay or whether she might need my help with something. The results were immediate and dramatic. My grades improved significantly when I stopped staying up late providing crisis counseling. I discovered a genuine passion for artificial intelligence research that led to an independent study project with one of the department's most respected professors. I started rock climbing regularly and found that I actually had a natural talent for it, even joining the campus climbing team. Most importantly, my relationship with Sophia deepened into something real and substantial. Unlike my friendship with Emma, this relationship felt balanced and healthy. Sophia was genuinely interested in my thoughts, goals, and experiences. She supported my academic and personal pursuits without trying to make them about her. When one of us had a problem, we worked through it together, instead of one person always being the helper and the other always being the one who needed help. The contrast was so stark that it made me wonder how I'd ever thought my dynamic with Emma was normal or healthy. But I also understood that I'd needed to go through that experience to appreciate what a truly supportive relationship could look like. Emma had taught me what I didn't want in a relationship, even if that hadn't been her intention. As winter turned to spring, I found myself genuinely excited about the future for the first time in years. I had job interviews lined up with several top tech companies, a research project that was generating real interest from graduate schools, and a relationship with someone who saw me as a whole person rather than just a source of emotional support. The transformation was so complete that when I occasionally ran into Emma around campus, I felt nothing more than a mild curiosity about how she was doing. The intense emotional attachment that had dominated my life for 3 years had been replaced by the kind of detached goodwill you might feel for any former friend who was no longer part of your daily life. Emma, for her part, seemed to be adapting to life without me as her primary support system. She'd joined a study group for her marketing classes and was apparently seeing someone new, a graduate student in the business school, who seemed more mature and stable than Tyler had been. When I heard about her new relationship through mutual friends, I felt genuinely happy for her rather than jealous or hurt. It was around this time that I realized I'd successfully completed what Sophia would later describe as the most difficult. Part of recovering from a codependent relationship, I'd learned to be genuinely content with my own life, instead of deriving my sense of worth from being needed by someone else. I was no longer Jake, Emma's best friend and emotional support system. I was just Jacand. That was more than enough. The internship offer from TechFlow Solutions arrived on a rainy Thursday morning in March, and I stared at the email for a full 5 minutes before the reality of it sank in. This wasn't just any internship, it was a paid position with one of the fastest-growing startups in Silicon Valley, with the possibility of a full-time offer after graduation. The salary they were offering for just a summer internship was more than my father made in 3 months at his job back home. 6 months. Earlier, I never would have even applied for something like this. I would have convinced myself I wasn't qualified enough, or that the application process was too competitive, or that I couldn't afford to spend a summer away from campus where Emma might need me. Now, sitting in my dorm room with the acceptance email glowing on my laptop screen, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or validation. Marcus burst through the door just as I was reaching for my phone to call my parents with the news. "Dude, did you see the robotics team rankings that just came out?" he asked, then stopped when he saw my expression. "Wait, what happened?" "You look like you just won the lottery." "Close," I said, turning my laptop toward him. "I got the TechFlow internship." Marcus's jaw dropped. "The one in Palo Alto? The one that only takes 12 interns nationwide?" He grabbed me in a bear hug before I could respond. "Jake, this is huge. This is like getting drafted into the major leagues of tech." The excitement in his voice was infectious, and for the first time since reading the email, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I'd accomplished. I had competed against thousands of applicants from top universities across the country, and I had won. Not because someone had given me special consideration or pulled strings on my behalf, but because I was genuinely good at what I did. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Coffee after your algorithms class? I have news to share too." I smiled, looking forward to telling her about the internship. Over the past few months, our relationship had evolved into something I'd never experienced before, a partnership where both people genuinely celebrated each other's successes without feeling threatened or diminished by them. The algorithms class that day felt like it lasted forever. Professor Chen was discussing optimization problems, but my mind kept drifting to the summer ahead. 3 months in California, working alongside some of the brightest minds in artificial intelligence, contributing to projects that could actually change how people interacted with technology. It felt surreal. When I finally made it to the coffee shop downtown, Sophia was waiting with 2 cups and a grin that rivaled my own. "Looked like someone who just got very good news," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "Could say that," I replied, then told her about the TechFlow offer. Her reaction was everything I could have hoped for, a genuine excitement. Detailed questions about the role and the company, and an immediate suggestion that we should celebrate properly. "My turn," she said, once I'd finished describing the internship. "Remember how I've been working on that research proposal about digital therapy interventions for anxiety disorders?" I nodded. Sophia had been passionate about the intersection of psychology and technology, particularly how apps and online platforms could make mental health resources more accessible to college students. "Dr. Martinez wants to submit it for publication," she continued, barely containing her excitement. "And she thinks there's a good chance it could get accepted for presentation at the National Psychology Conference this fall. If it does, she wants me to co-author a follow-up study for my honors thesis." This time it was my turn to grab her in a hug. Getting published as an undergraduate was incredibly rare, especially in a field as competitive as psychology. The fact that her professor was taking her research seriously enough to submit it to a major conference was a huge validation of her abilities. "We're quite the power couple," Sophia said with a laugh as we separated. "Both of us killing it academically. I think this calls for dinner somewhere fancier than the dining hall." The phrase power couple stuck with me as we made plans for our celebration dinner. It perfectly captured what felt different about this relationship compared to my history with Emma. Sophia and I were both pursuing our own ambitious goals. And instead of one person's dreams taking precedence, we were actively supporting each other's individual growth. That evening, as we sat in a small Italian restaurant downtown, sharing stories about our respective breakthroughs, I found myself thinking about how different my life had become. 6 months ago, any significant news, good or bad, would have immediately made me think about how Emma would react, whether she'd be genuinely happy for me or somehow make it about her own situation. Now, Emma hadn't crossed my mind once during this entire day of celebration. The realization was liberating. I had successfully rebuilt my identity around my own interests, goals, and relationships, instead of organizing everything around someone who had never truly seen me as a priority. As the person I was becoming felt more authentic than the version of myself I'd been for the previous 3 years. Spring semester flew by in a blur of final projects, job preparation, and deepening relationships with the people who had become my actual support system. The robotics team placed third in the national competition, which was high enough to attract attention from several major tech companies. My rock climbing skills had improved to the point where I was regularly completing advanced routes that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Most importantly, I felt genuinely confident about my abilities and my future in a way that didn't depend on external validation.
Ow.
The contrast with my old mindset was striking. Previously, I had measured my worth by how much Emma needed me, how effectively I could solve her problems, how grateful she seemed for my support. Now, I measured my worth by my own accomplishments, my growth as a person, and my ability to contribute meaningfully to the relationships and communities I was part of. Graduation approached with a sense of excitement rather than anxiety. I had multiple job offers to choose from, thanks to the connections I'd made through the robotics team and my upcoming internship. Sophia had been accepted to several top graduate programs for clinical psychology. We'd talked seriously about the logistics of maintaining our relationship while pursuing demanding careers in different cities. And for the first time in my life, I was in a relationship mature enough to handle those kinds of conversations honestly. It was during finals week that I had my first real interaction with Emma in months. I was leaving the library after a marathon study session when I heard someone call my name. Turning around, I saw Emma jogging to catch up with me, looking significantly different from the last time we'd spoken. She'd cut her hair shorter, traded her usual sorority girl aesthetic for something more professional. And there was a confidence in her posture that I hadn't seen before. More than anything, she looked genuinely happy in a way that seemed to come from within rather than from whatever guy she was dating. "Jake," she said, as she reached me, slightly out of breath. "I was hoping I'd run into you before graduation. Do you have a minute to talk?" I glanced at my watch. Sophia was expecting me for dinner in an hour, and I still needed to shower and change, but curiosity won out. "Sure," I said. "What's up?" We found a quiet spot on one of the benches near the library, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Awkwardness was palpable, but it wasn't the painful, emotionally charged tension I might have expected. Instead, it felt like the natural distance between two people who used to be close but had grown in different directions. "I owe you an apology," Emma said finally. "Actually, I owe you several apologies, but I'll start with the big one. We're right about Tyler, and you were right about our friendship being unbalanced. I didn't see it at the time, but looking back, I can see how unfair I was to you." The apology caught me off guard. This was a level of self-awareness and accountability that I'd never seen from Emma before. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, "but you don't need to apologize. We were both getting something out of that dynamic, even if it wasn't healthy for either of us." Emma shook her head. No, I do need to apologize. I took advantage of your feelings for me. I knew you cared about me as more than a friend, and I used that to get emotional support without having to give anything real back. That was selfish and cruel, even if I didn't fully understand what I was doing at the time. Her honesty was refreshing, but it also felt strange to have this conversation now. When the intense emotions that had once surrounded our relationship had faded into something more like historical curiosity, what made you realize all this? I asked. Therapy, mostly, Emma said with a rueful smile. After Tyler and I broke up, I was pretty lost for a while. When I couldn't turn to you for support like I always had, I realized I didn't actually know how to handle my own problems. I ended up at the campus counseling center. Dr. Williams helped me see a lot of things about my relationship patterns that I'd never recognized before. The mention of therapy made me think of Sophia's research on digital mental health interventions. It struck me that Emma's journey towards self-awareness had paralleled my own growth, just through different methods and for different reasons. Glad you got the help you needed, I said, meaning it sincerely. You seem like you're in a much better place now. I am, Emma agreed. I'm actually excited about my life for the first time in years. I got accepted to a master's program in nonprofit management at Northwestern, and I'm moving to Chicago this summer. I'm going to work for an organization that provides resources for college students dealing with mental health issues. The career choice made perfect sense for her, and I felt genuinely pleased that she'd found a direction that seemed to align with her strengths and interests. That sounds amazing, Em. You'll be great at that. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching other students hurry past with their arms full of textbooks and the stressed expressions that were universal during finals week. I heard about your internship with TechFlow, Emma said eventually. That's incredible, Jake. I always knew you were brilliant, but I don't think I ever really appreciated how driven and capable you are. I was too focused on my own drama to see what was right in front of me. The compliment was nice to hear, but it didn't carry the emotional weight it would have 6 months earlier. Instead of feeling validated by her recognition, I simply felt pleased that she'd grown enough to acknowledge other people's accomplishments without making them about herself. Thank you, I said. I'm really excited about it. Feels like the perfect next step. Are you and Sophia serious? Emma asked, and there was something in her tone that I couldn't quite read. I see you two together around campus sometimes. She seems really nice. The question didn't feel loaded with jealousy or regret the way it might have in the past. Instead, it seemed like genuine curiosity about my life. We are, I said. She's incredible. We're planning to do long distance while I'm in California, and she's starting grad school. Emma nodded thoughtfully. I'm happy for you, really. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering our post-graduation plans and some shared memories from our mutual friends. When we finally said goodbye, it felt like a real ending, not the bitter, unresolved conclusion to our friendship that had occurred months earlier, but a mature acknowledgement that we'd both grown beyond the people we'd been when we first met. Walking back to my dorm, I realized that I felt nothing but goodwill toward Emma. The intense romantic feelings that had once dominated my thoughts about her had been completely replaced by the kind of distant, no fondness you might feel for an old friend you'd outgrown. More importantly, I felt proud of how I'd handled the conversation as a confident, self-assured person who was secure in his own life and relationships. That evening, over dinner with Sophia, I recounted the conversation with Emma. Sophia listened with the kind of thoughtful attention she always gave to important topics, asking clarifying questions and offering insights without judgment. Sounds like she's done some real work on herself, Sophia observed. That kind of self-awareness and willingness to apologize takes genuine growth. I'm glad she was able to acknowledge how the dynamic between you two worked. It was surreal, I admitted. 6 months ago, a conversation like that would have left me emotionally wrecked for days. Today, it felt like talking to someone I used to know well but don't really have a connection with anymore.
Oh.
Sophia smiled. That's what healthy emotional boundaries look like. You can care about someone's well-being without being emotionally invested in their life. You can acknowledge good history without wanting to recreate it. Her perspective helped me understand why the conversation with Emma had felt so different from what I might have expected. I had genuinely moved on, not just from my romantic feelings for her, but from the codependent dynamic that had defined our relationship. I no longer needed her validation or approval to feel good about myself, and I no longer felt responsible for her emotional well-being. The final weeks of college passed in a whirlwind of celebrations, farewells, and preparations. For the next chapter, at graduation, I saw Emma briefly during the ceremony, sitting with her family several rows away. We exchanged waves and smiles, but there was no dramatic reconciliation or emotional moment. Just two people who had once been important to each other, acknowledging each other's milestone before moving on to their separate futures. Standing there in my cap and gown, surrounded by friends who had supported my growth over the past year, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. The painful end of my friendship with Emma had forced me to examine my own patterns and priorities in a way that had ultimately made me a stronger, more self-aware person. I thought about the Jake who had sat in that coffee shop 8 months earlier, listening to Emma plan a romantic trip with the boyfriend who had just threatened to break up with her. That version of myself felt like a different person, someone who had been so focused on being needed that he'd forgotten to build a life worth living. The Jake who was graduating with honors, heading to a dream internship, and in a healthy relationship with someone who genuinely valued him, felt like who I was always meant to become. It had just taken losing the thing I thought I wanted most to discover what I actually needed. The TechFlow office in Palo Alto was everything I'd imagined Silicon Valley would be: sleek glass buildings, ping tables and break rooms, and an energy that hummed with innovation. My first day as a machine learning intern, I was assigned to work on natural language processing algorithms that would eventually help the company's flagship product understand human conversation patterns more accurately. My supervisor, Dr. Rachel Kim, was a Stanford PhD who had joined TechFlow straight from her postdoc research. She had a reputation for being demanding but fair, and within the first week, she made it clear that she expected her interns to contribute at the level of junior engineers rather than just fetch coffee and take notes. The project you'll be working on this summer has real commercial implications, she explained during our first one-on-one meeting. We're trying to build an AI system that can detect emotional subtext in written communication. Think about how often people say one thing, but mean something completely different, especially in digital conversations. The irony wasn't lost on me. After spending 3 years misreading Emma's signals and interpreting kindness as romantic interest, I was now being paid to teach computers how to understand the hidden meanings in human communication. The work was challenging in the best possible way. I spent my days immersed in complex algorithms, collaborating with some of the brightest minds I'd ever encountered, and seeing my code actually function in real-world applications. The imposter syndrome I'd worried about never materialized. Instead, I found myself contributing ideas that my more experienced colleagues took seriously and sometimes implemented. 3 weeks into the internship, Dr. Kim pulled me aside after a particularly productive team meeting. Jake, I want you to know that your work on the sentiment analysis module has been exceptional. You're thinking about these problems in ways that show real intuition for the field. The praise felt different from the validation I used to seek from Emma. This was recognition of my actual abilities and contributions, not just gratitude for emotional support or problem solving. It reinforced the confidence I'd been building over the past year about my own worth and capabilities. My evenings in California were spent exploring the Bay Area, video chatting with Sophia about our respective summer experiences, and occasionally grabbing drinks with other interns from the program. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely content with my own company. The constant background anxiety about whether someone needed me or whether I was doing enough for others had been replaced by a peaceful focus on my own growth and goals. It was during one of these evening video calls with Sophia that she mentioned something that would soon become relevant in ways I couldn't have predicted. You know, Emma's been asking mutual friends about you, she said casually while describing her day at the research lab where she was working. Apparently she's been trying to figure out how to get in touch with you. I felt a flicker of curiosity but no emotional charge. Did she say why? Not specifically, but from what I heard, Through Ashley, it sounds like she's having some kind of quarter-life crisis. The nonprofit job isn't going as well as she expected, and she's been struggling with the transition to post-college life. I think she might be idealizing your friendship now that she doesn't have access to the support you used to provide. Sophia's analysis was probably accurate, and I appreciated her straightforward way of presenting the information without suggesting what I should or shouldn't do about it. This was another thing I loved about our relationship. She trusted me to make my own decisions about complex emotional situations instead of trying to manage my responses. Interesting, I said, but not really my problem anymore. Exactly, Sophia agreed. I just thought you should know, in case she does manage to track down your contact information. As it turned out, Emma's efforts to reach me were more persistent than I'd anticipated. A few days later, I received a friend request on LinkedIn, along with a message that was clearly crafted to seem professional while actually being quite personal. Hi, Jake. I saw your profile and wanted to congratulate you on the TechFlow internship. I'm working in Chicago now and would love to catch up about our post-graduation experiences. I've been thinking a lot about our college friendship lately and would really appreciate the chance to talk. Hope you're doing well. The message was skillfully written, professional enough that it couldn't be dismissed as inappropriate contact, but personal enough that it was clearly an attempt to reestablish our old dynamic. The mention of thinking about our college friendship was particularly transparent, suggesting that she wanted to discuss and possibly revive the relationship she'd previously taken for granted. I stared at the message for several minutes, analyzing my own emotional response. A year ago, any contact from Emma would have sent me into an emotional tailspin, either with renewed hope if the message seemed positive or with hurt if it seemed dismissive. Now I felt nothing stronger than mild curiosity about what she wanted to discuss. After some consideration, I decided to accept the LinkedIn connection, but didn't respond to the message immediately. I wanted to think through whether engaging with Emma would serve any productive purpose either for her or for me. The question wasn't whether I could handle the interaction emotionally. I felt confident about my boundaries and my current life situation. The question was whether there was any value in reopening a communication channel with someone who had a history of treating me as an emotional support system. That weekend, I called Marcus to get his perspective. He was spending his summer in Boston, working for a consulting firm and apparently thriving in the fast-paced environment. She's reaching out because her life isn't going as smoothly as she is expected, and she's remembering how much easier things were when she had you to help her process everything, he said bluntly. The question is whether you want to be her therapist again, or whether you've moved beyond that dynamic. Marcus's directness was helpful. He'd watched me struggle with the MA situation for years, and he'd also witnessed my transformation over the past year. His perspective carried weight because he'd seen both versions of me and clearly preferred the person I'd become. I think I'm curious to see what she actually wants, I admitted. Not because I want to get pulled back into the old dynamic, but because I'm genuinely interested in whether she's grown as much as she seemed to have during our conversation at graduation. Just be careful, Marcus warned. People can seem like they've changed when they're in crisis mode. When they get what they want, they often revert to their old patterns. If you do respond to her, make sure you're doing it from a position of strength, not from leftover feelings or guilt about not being available when she needed support. His advice resonated with me. The truth was that I had moved beyond any romantic feelings for Emma, and I felt genuinely curious about her current situation from an objective standpoint. If I could interact with her while maintaining clear boundaries and without getting emotionally invested in her problems, it might actually be an interesting test of how much I'd grown. 3 days later, I sent a brief, professional response. Thanks for reaching out. Emma, glad to hear you're settling into life in Chicago. I'm enjoying the internship and learning a lot. Hope your work at the nonprofit is rewarding. The response was deliberately neutral, friendly enough to acknowledge her message, but not so enthusiastic as to encourage further personal conversation. I was curious to see how she would interpret and respond to this boundary setting. Her reply came within hours, and it was much longer and more emotionally laden than my brief response had invited. Jake, I can't tell you how good it is to hear from you. I've been thinking so much about our friendship lately and honestly regretting how things ended between us. I know I wasn't always the best friend to you, and I've been working on understanding my own patterns better. The nonprofit work has been challenging in ways I didn't expect, and I find myself wishing I had someone to talk through these new experiences with. I know we left things in a complicated place, but I miss having you in my life. Would you be open to a phone call sometime? I'd love to hear about what you're working on and share some of the things I've been learning about myself. The message was a masterclass in emotional manipulation disguised as personal growth. Emma had acknowledged some responsibility for our past dynamic, but she'd immediately followed that acknowledgement with a request for exactly the kind of emotional support that had characterized our previous relationship. The phrase wishing I had someone to talk through these new experiences with was particularly telling. She wasn't looking for friendship in the sense of mutual support and shared experiences. She was looking for someone to help her process her feelings and solve her problems. More importantly, the timing of her outreach was suspiciously convenient. According to Sophia's reports from mutual friends, Emma had been struggling with her new job and living situation for months. She hadn't reached out when things were going well in her life. She'd reached out now that she was facing challenges and needed support. I showed the message to Dr. Kim during one of our coffee breaks, curious to get an outside perspective from someone who didn't know our history. "This person wants something from you," she said immediately after reading the message. "The language is very carefully constructed to make you feel guilty for not being available, while also suggesting that you owe them some kind of response because they've learned and grown. But notice that they haven't actually offered anything to you, no interest in your experiences except as a lead-in to sharing their own problems." Dr. Kim's analysis confirmed my own instincts about Emma's message. This wasn't someone who had genuinely grown beyond our old dynamic. This was someone who missed having access to the emotional support I used to provide and was trying to reestablish that access by appealing to my sense of guilt and nostalgia. I decided not to respond immediately, instead taking several days to consider whether I wanted to engage further. During that time, Emma sent follow-up messages, first a casual, "Just wanted to make sure you got my message," and then a more urgent, "Jake, I'm starting to worry that I said something wrong. Can we please talk?" The escalation pattern was familiar from our college relationship. Emma had always responded to any reduction in my availability with increased urgency and appeals to my concern for her well-being. The fact that she was reverting to these tactics so quickly after her initial message suggested that she hadn't actually changed as much as she'd claimed. When I finally did respond, I kept my message brief and clear. "Emma, I appreciate you reaching out, but I'm not interested in resuming regular communication. I'm focused on my internship and my own life right now. I wish you the best with your work in Chicago." The response was swift and revealed the emotional manipulation that had been lurking beneath her previous messages. "I can't believe you're being so cold to me. I know I made mistakes in college, but I thought we meant more to each other than this. I'm going through a really difficult time right now, and I thought my oldest friend would care enough to at least talk to me. I guess I was wrong about the kind of person you are." The guilt trip was so transparent that I almost laughed. Emma had moved from acknowledging her past mistakes to blaming me for being cold. From requesting support to demanding it as something I owed her based on our history. Most tellingly, she'd described herself as my oldest friend despite the fact that our relationship had always been more one-sided than mutual. Rather than feeling guilty or conflicted about her response, I felt validated in my decision to maintain boundaries. This interaction had confirmed that Emma hadn't actually grown beyond the patterns that had made our friendship unhealthy. She was still looking for someone to manage her emotions and solve her problems. And she was still willing to use guilt and manipulation when direct requests didn't work. I didn't respond to her final message, and after a few more attempts to provoke a reaction, Emma apparently gave up. The entire interaction had lasted less than 2 weeks, but it had served as a powerful reminder of why I'd needed to step away from our friendship in the first place. More importantly, it had shown me how much I'd grown. A year earlier, Emma's emotional appeals would have worked. I would have felt guilty about not being available during her difficult time, and I probably would have ended up spending hours on the phone helping her process her work frustrations and relationship problems. Now, I could see her tactics for what they were and respond from a place of strength rather than guilt. I could wish her well without feeling responsible for her emotional well-being. I could maintain my boundaries without feeling like I was being cruel or selfish. got. The contrast between my interaction with Emma and my ongoing relationship with Sophia couldn't have been more stark. When Sophia faced challenges at her research position, she talked them through with me, but she also sought appropriate support from mentors and colleagues. When I had frustrating days at TechFlow, she listened and offered perspective. But she didn't try to solve my problems for me. We supported each other without either person becoming responsible for managing the other's emotional state. Internship entered its final month. I found myself reflecting on how different my life had become from what I'd imagined a year earlier. I'd built a career foundation based on my actual talents and interests, rather than on being useful to someone else. I'd developed a romantic relationship, characterized by mutual respect and support, rather than one-sided emotional caretaking. Most importantly, I'd learned to value myself based on my own accomplishments and growth, rather than on how much other people needed me. The transformation had required giving up something that had felt essential to my identity for 3 years being Emma's primary source of emotional support. But in losing that role, I'd gained something much more valuable, a sense of self-worth that didn't depend on anyone else's validation or needs. I'd learned the difference between being needed and being valued, between being useful and being despoiled. Respected between being someone's safety net and being someone's equal partner. As I prepared for my final presentation at TechFlow, summarizing the machine learning algorithms I'd developed over the summer, I realized that I was genuinely excited about my future for the first time in years, not because someone else needed me, or because I was hoping to earn someone's love and attention, but because I was building a life that reflected my own values, interests, and goals. The person I'd become felt more authentic and more sustainable than the version of myself I'd been in college. I'd learned that real self-worth comes from within, that healthy relationships require mutual respect and reciprocity, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their unhealthy patterns by refusing to be their emotional crutch. Emma had taught me all of these lessons, though not in the way she'd intended. For that, I would always be grateful even if I never spoke to her again. 2 years after graduation, I was sitting in my corner office at TechFlow's Austin headquarters, reviewing code for an AI project that would launch next quarter, when my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Someone had shared an article about emerging tech companies, and TechFlow had been featured prominently. The article mentioned my promotion to senior machine learning engineer and quoted my thoughts on the future of conversational AI. The notification itself wasn't unusual. My work had been getting more visibility as TechFlow grew from a startup into a major player in the artificial intelligence space. What caught my attention was the comment thread that had developed under the shared article. Someone had written, "I went to college with Jake Martinez, so proud to see him succeeding." Like this. The commenter was Ashley, one of Emma's sorority sisters. Within minutes, several other Pacific State alumni had chimed in with their own congratulations and memories. It was flattering to see old classmates celebrating my success. But what really struck me was the absence of any comment from Emma herself. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself looking up Emma's current LinkedIn profile. What I found surprised me more than I'd expected. She was no longer working for the nonprofit in Chicago. Instead, her profile showed a series of short-term positions over the past 18 months, a marketing coordinator role that lasted 6 months, a brief stint as a social media manager, and currently a position as an assistant at a small consulting firm in Denver. Each job change was accompanied by optimistic posts about exciting new opportunities and following my passion. But the pattern suggested someone who was struggling to find stability and direction. Confident, purposeful version of Emma I'd encountered at graduation seemed to have given way to someone who was floundering professionally. More telling were the personal posts scattered throughout her feed. Motivational quotes about overcoming challenges, articles about dealing with anxiety and depression, and several posts about the importance of authentic friendship and surrounding yourself with people who truly support your dreams. The subtext was clear. Wall was struggling, both professionally and personally. I felt a complicated mix of emotions looking at her profile. There was no satisfaction in seeing her difficulties, but there was a sense of validation that my decision to step away from our friendship had been the right one. The Emma who was posting inspirational quotes about authentic relationships was the same person who had tried to guilt me into resuming our old dynamic when she'd needed emotional support. My phone rang, interrupting my LinkedIn research. It was Sophia calling from her graduate program at Northwestern, where she was finishing her second year in clinical psychology. "How's my favorite tech genius today?" she asked, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Currently being stalked by nostalgia," I replied, closing the LinkedIn tab. I just went down a rabbit hole looking up college people. Not sure why I do that to myself. Find anything interesting? I told her about Emma's professional struggles and the pattern of job changes. Sophia listened without judgment, a skill she'd honed through her clinical training and one that had made our long distance relationship work better than I'd thought possible. "It's natural to be curious about people who were important to you," she said. "The fact that you can look at her situation with perspective instead of feeling responsible for fixing it shows how much you've grown." She was right. 2 years ago, learning about Emma's struggles would have triggered an immediate urge to reach out and offer support. Now, I felt the same detached concern I might have for any former acquaintance who seemed to be having a difficult time sympathy without any sense of obligation. "Speaking of growth," Sophia continued, "I have some news. I got the internship at the Austin Psychology Center. I'll be moving there this summer." I nearly dropped my phone. Sophia had been applying for clinical internships across the country, and we'd both prepared ourselves for the possibility that her placement might take her even further away from Texas. The fact that she'd be moving to the same city where I'd just bought a house felt almost too good to be true. "That's incredible," I said, already mentally rearranging my spare bedroom into a proper office for her. "When do you start?" "July 1st. I'll be working primarily with young adults dealing with anxiety and relationship issues. It's exactly the kind of work I want to do, and the supervisor I'd be working with is doing research on digital therapy. Interventions basically a continuation of what I started in college." The conversation shifted to logistics and excitement about finally being in the same city again. But part of my mind was still processing the coincidence of Sophia's specialty. She would be helping people navigate exactly the kinds of issues that had characterized my relationship with Emma: codependency, anxiety around relationships, difficulty setting boundaries. That evening, as I cooked dinner in the kitchen of the house I'd bought 6 months earlier, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since those late nights in college coffee shops. The house itself was a symbol of the independence. I'd gained a modern 2-bedroom place in East Austin with large windows and a small yard where I was attempting to grow tomatoes. Everything about my current life reflected choices I'd made based on my own interests and values rather than someone else's needs or expectations. The job that challenged me intellectually and paid well enough that I could afford the house I wanted. The hobbies I'd developed because they brought me joy: rock climbing, photography, and recently learning to play guitar. The relationship with someone who supported my goals while pursuing her own ambitious career. Most importantly, I'd learned to be genuinely content with my own company. The desperate need for external validation that had characterized my college years had been replaced by a quiet confidence in my own worth and capabilities. I could spend an evening alone without feeling lonely, make decisions without seeking approval, handle challenges without immediately looking for someone else to solve them for me. 6 months later, Sophia and I were hosting a housewarming party in our shared home she'd moved in after her internship started, and it had felt natural and right in a way that didn't require overthinking. The party was small but meaningful, filled with the friends we'd made in Austin's tech and psychology communities. Marcus had flown in from Boston, where he was thriving in his consulting career, and recently engaged to a brilliant lawyer he'd met through work. David from the robotics team was there with his wife, both of them now working for a medical device company and expecting their first child. Even Dr. Kim had come, having moved to Austin to open TechFlow's new research division. As I looked around at the people gathered in our living room, successful, fulfilled individuals who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, realized this was what healthy community looked like. These were relationships built on mutual respect, shared interests, and reciprocal support. No one in this room was using anyone else as an emotional crutch. No one was sacrificing their own well-being to manage someone else's feelings. Contrast with my college social life couldn't have been more stark. Then, my entire social world had revolved around Emma and the drama of her relationships. Now, my life was rich with connections that added value rather than creating obligation. Later that night, after the last guests had left, and Sophia and I were cleaning up, she mentioned something that brought the evening full circle. "You know, I had a client this week who reminded me of your stories about Emma," she said, loading glasses into the dishwasher. "A 24-year-old woman who's been cycling through relationships where she gets intensely attached to people who provide emotional support, then gets angry when they try to set boundaries. It's textbook codependency, but she doesn't see the pattern yet." "I think she'll figure it out?" I asked. "Maybe. Some people do the work and learn to build healthier relationships. Others keep repeating the same patterns until they find someone willing to enable them indefinitely." Sophia paused, considering. "The people who change are usually the ones who hit some kind of bottom and realize they have to take responsibility for their own emotional well-being." I thought about Emma's LinkedIn profile, the series of job changes and inspirational posts about overcoming challenges. Maybe she was doing that work and learning to build the kind of authentic relationships she'd posted about. Maybe she wasn't. Either way, it wasn't my responsibility to find out. What mattered was that I'd learned the lessons I needed to learn from our friendship. I'd discovered the difference between being needed and being valued, between enabling someone's dysfunction and supporting their growth, between sacrifice and reciprocity. Most importantly, I'd learned that real self-worth has to come from within, from your own accomplishments, growth, and choices rather than from how much someone else depends on you. The Jake who had sat in that coffee shop 4 years ago, listening to Emma plan romantic trips with boyfriends who treated her poorly, had been looking for love in all the wrong places. He'd thought that being indispensable to someone was the same as being loved by them, that sacrifice was the highest form of care, that being needed was evidence of being valuable. The Jake who was washing dishes in his own kitchen, planning weekend rock climbing trips with his girlfriend, and preparing for a promotion that would put him in charge of his own research team, learned something much more important: the people who truly love you want you to thrive, not just survive. They celebrate your success rather than demanding your sacrifice. They value your happiness as much as their own comfort. Emma had been my backup plan for so long that I'd forgotten to be my own first choice. Learning to prioritize my own growth and well-being hadn't just changed my life, it had made me capable of the kind of healthy or reciprocal love that I'd found with Sophia. In the end, Emma had given me the most valuable lesson of all, even though it wasn't the lesson either of us had expected. She'd taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from someone who takes you for granted. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to stop enabling their unhealthy patterns. And sometimes the person you're really supposed to save is yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.